tired already? Yeah. Do you have a class right now or something? What day is it? Well, thanks for being here. We've got one student out, so I will be video recording this class until we all can get back together again. I'm going to start by returning homework that you had turned into me way back when. So it'll just take me a minute to get that to you, and then we'll take a look at the assignment that you have for me today. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. Can you turn that in for her? I mean, in a few minutes. Yeah, okay,
You want
perfect.
me to take this one or you
Oh,
want that?
I don't know if I'm comfortable.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was just asking.
Yeah, so, do you know, well, I think she did send me an email. You know, she's going to be out for like a couple weeks.
But
Okay.
she might still have to quarantine.
Okay,
She's waiting to hear back.
okay,
So,
okay. Just wanted to know if you knew. So I will say that the grades were very good for this first assignment. I mean, it wasn't, I guess, that hard of an assignment, so I expected that, but good job, way to go. Keep it up. You do work like that the rest of the semester, and you'll fly right through this course. All right, good. So if you haven't already, could you take out your handout that is due today? I'll get mine out. By the way, it's good to see that you all survived the blizzard we had on Friday. Did any, I mean, I know some of you did because you had me, but did any of you have class on Friday?
Yeah.
Well, some of you did, some of you didn't. At any rate, does anyone have any questions about something on this assignment? I am going to collect this assignment in just a few minutes, but I did want to give you, of course, a chance to query or ask or check something about the assignment before I do pick it up. Remember, we talked, I know it's been a while since we met last, but we talked about a lot of details, a lot of facts about score notation last time. And we talked a lot of, well, not a lot, but we talked a little bit about the translations of some of the foreign terms, whether they're instrumental terms, whether they're just musical terms in general, that kind of thing. Did you remember on your scores, the front and the back, did you remember to include things like clef, key, and meter? Did you remember to include what I call a system volume on the left? Did you include the brackets that you need to include for the instrument sections or choirs? And then also any maybe additional brackets that you need for the same kind of instrument using more than one staff. We talked about rests, in a sense. We talked about what to include on the first page of music, which you have on the back side of your handout. And then we talked about bar lines too, even, and how to draw those correctly within each section or choir of the orchestra, but not between, not connecting sections or choirs of the orchestra itself. All right, last call before I pick this up. Anything? Nope, you feel comfortable? Great. If you feel comfortable, I feel comfortable. So make sure your name is on it, and I'll come around and gather it up. sir. Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss yours?
Yeah.
Are you still working on it?
No, I was just pulling notes for someone.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, I
I'm
see.
just having fun.
I thought you were writing me notes.
Oh.
Okay. That's, we have a lot of time in this class if you guys don't ask questions on the homework, which is fine, but we got plenty of time, so. All right, today I'd like to talk about two main things. Number one, I'd like to talk about, it's all regarding notation again. This is the last day I'll spend on notation before we move on to other things. One thing I'd like to mention is I'd like to talk about correct, or neat notation, correct vertical alignment is what it's called. And then the second thing I'd like to discuss with you today is I'd like to talk about what you need in order to notate a set of parts, individual parts correctly, okay? As opposed to an entire score with all the instrumentation, what you need to do in order to make a set of parts. Because by the end of this, towards the end of the semester, we are going to not only have a score, but you're also going to need a set of parts for the final transcription project, so that the wind ensemble players can play their respective parts. We won't need to do parts for the first project or the second project, but just like we do for the final project. All right, so let me start with the vertical alignment, clear notation, neat notation. To make reading a score easier, it is, of course, you probably, I mean, maybe it's even obvious, it's obvious that the musical events which occur at the same time need to be aligned correctly. They need to be aligned vertically. And I guess I didn't turn the TVs on yet. This is one of the few classes where it's okay if I tell you to turn the TV on. I don't believe you have this example or this page. This comes from, again, the recommended text that's on your syllabus by Alfred Blatter. But I hope you can at least, yeah, that's going to have to be good enough. I hope you can at least see either this screen or that screen close enough for my illustration. First of all, this is an example of what not to do. I don't know if you can tell from where you're sitting. But in this example, it is difficult to tell what pitches will be sounded together. Maybe I can even go a little bit bigger, because we don't need the caption at the bottom. In fact, we don't even need the voice name or the instrument names over there on the left. We just need to look at kind of the vertical alignment. Do you see how the meter in this example is in cut time, or 2/2 meters? If you look, we've got a couple saxophones up top. We have a trumpet, a trombone, and a tuba. I know I cut that off the screen. And then we have a string bass at the bottom. And aside from the bar lines and the brackets and all the things we talked about last class, do each of the parts, do they align rhythmically pretty well? Wow. Maybe at first glance it doesn't look so bad, but if you look closely, I think you're going to find that it's not very clear. I can give you several examples. I won't give you all the examples, but for instance, take a look at the two saxophone parts up there. Do you see how one saxophone part has 2 eighth notes at the end, and the other saxophone part has 1 eighth note, and they're not aligned at the right time slice?
Yeah.
They're not aligned at the right spot. Take a look at, for instance, over here, the same thing. I don't know what happened to the saxophone parts. Whoever wrote this, maybe they were smoking something. I don't know. But I mean, this eighth note is not aligned with this final eighth note over here. That's not very clear. And in fact, one that's really pretty wacky, pretty egregious is this third measure in the trumpet part. That's a whole note. And do we notate whole notes right in the center of a measure? No. Where should they be notated? Yeah, at the beginning of the measure on beat 1. So it kind of looks to me like this whole note is supposed to come in on beat 3, which makes no, or not beat 3, excuse me, beat 2, which makes no sense with the meter as it comes in halfway through the measure, and yet it's supposed to be lasting for 2 half notes. Right? Just some misalignment here. You can see the string bass's quarter notes are just not aligned well with the tuba's quarter notes in the staff right above. Neither are the eighth notes. Oops, where's my hand? I can't find my hand. Neither are the eighth notes right here. So I mean, there's a lot of things I think that are a little bit strange, a little bit goofy, a little bit confused, well maybe more than a little bit confusing about this notation. And if you had a score that was written like this that you gave to a conductor, and you wanted a live ensemble to practice or perform or rehearse or whatever, this would take a lot of time to sift through, I think. A lot of time that does not need to be wasted. Okay, a lot of time that does not need to be wasted. So when you handwrite anything in this class, whether it's for an assignment, usually if it's for some kind of score, parts are aligning parts, individual parts is a little different, but for a score, I do want to ask you that you take the care, if you can, take the time to make sure that you line things up rhythmically appropriately. I mean, if you look even at this, I think this is the trombone line. Take a look, the trombone and the trumpet, their first beat in the first measure is way off compared to the first beat of the saxophone parts and then the tuba and the bass down below. It's just not lining up clearly. And it makes it very hard to read. Okay? So I encourage you, if when you do your homework, especially when it comes to notation, but always, try not to do your homework in front of the TV or in front of something playing on YouTube, because if you need to focus and make sure that you kind of align things, I mean, you don't have to use a ruler or anything like that. Just do your best to eyeball it. Excuse me, that's all I ask, but I do want you to take the care to do that so that it's readable, so that it's relatively neat. So let's take a look at this same example. Let's see how it could be cleared up a little bit. So I'm going to show you one that should be aligned rhythmically a lot better. Is this like going to the eye doctor where he finally puts some lens on where you can see clearly, right? I really like how the trumpet's whole note is positioned correctly. That really helps. I like how the saxophone's eighth notes that were really askew before are aligned up in all the measures, and how these quarter notes down here are aligned, and how the first beat of this measure is aligned, and all that stuff. It makes it a lot easier to count. It makes it a lot easier to read, of course, right? Maybe you don't need me to tell you this, but I do make just a little point of that on this day when we're talking about notation. That, wherever your musical path may lead you, if you end up arranging for a high school band or high school choir or elementary whatever, it doesn't matter what age you are, they're going to appreciate something that's more readable and something that's neat. And it would save you time. It'll save you time in the long run. Okay. One thing I was going to mention before I forget, because I may forget later on. What about this whole? Here. What about this whole rest? Are whole rests allowed to be centered? Do they go at the very beginning of beat one of them? No. Whole rests are the exception, right? Whole rests, since they fill the whole measure, unlike the whole note. Where there it is, the whole note, but a whole rest is allowed and should be centered in the measure, but not a whole note. The whole note goes at the beginning. Okay. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns, or snide remarks about this? No? Are you guys really good today? Not that you're never not, but you know what I mean. Let's change course here a little bit. We're still going to talk about notation, but let's talk about part notation now. And for this, I do have a handout that you can use to refer to. And the reason I'm going to give you this handout is because there's a visual, there's a picture, even though it's handwritten, but there's a picture of the first page of an individual part. And I like to show you diagrams and pictures when I can, especially when your book does not offer them to you. So, and again, this comes from that recommended text. You have all the information for that book on your syllabus. Oh, should I give you two for? This. Now, last time we met, I think I gave you a packet of like 1 or 2 pages. I don't know if you still have that, but if you do, I think I gave you, one of the page numbers I gave you in that packet last class was number page 6, is that correct? Okay. On page 6 of that packet last time, this is the score that we talked about. This is things that you need to include on the first page of a musical score. Now, the handout I just gave you 2 seconds ago, that is an individual part that is pulled or extracted from this very score. And so if you compare, I guess, the information that's on the first page of the score, especially up at the top, with the information that's up at the top of the first page of the part on the sheet I just gave you, hopefully you'll see some relationships and similarities because they kind of go together. And that's the idea. So first of all, once a score, the full score is completed, the next task will be to extract your parts. And let me make a point to say, you want to make sure that your score is as free from errors as possible before you extract the parts. Take it from someone who's gone through this and has experience. If you miss something on the score, or you see a glaring error on the score, but you've already extracted the parts, you have to make the correction to the error in 2 places instead of 1, right? You have to make it not only on the score, but then also on the part that the error was in on the score. You have to fix that as well. Okay? So it's in all of our best interests to have the score as free from error as we can make it, to proofread it, to double check it, and make sure it's how we want it to sound. And then after that, then we can safely extract the parts. And there may be a few errors and a few things to correct or to fix, but hopefully not too many, which again saves a lot of time. All right, now, if some of the parts that you're extracting, or if they're going to be performed by several players, then more than 1 copy of the parts will be needed. That makes sense, right? I mean, that's pretty logical. Usually 1 copy of a part for every 2 performers is desired. That's what I read. Now, those of you that are instrumentalists or in the wind ensemble, you tell me. I want to have you guys talk a little bit and give me a little feedback. When it comes to parts, do you all, I don't know, does he give you all a part for you to read all by yourself, or do you have to share with somebody?
All by yourself.
All by yourself? Okay. So, for instance, let's say we have, I don't know, are there 2 or 3 tubas in the wind ensemble?
There's 3.
There's 3. So it's not like there's 1 part where you all have to crowd around 1 stand and try to read, you have your own.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a lot of times when you have an orchestra, and especially in the string sections, you don't have an individual part for every violinist. What you do is you have 1 part for like 2 people that play violin 1, and they share and they read off of the same stand. That's generally how it goes, at least I know with the string parts. So that you don't have papers just flying all over the place and way too many, right? You only have to make half as many parts for string players as there are players in general. But if it comes down to, when it comes to band instruments or wind ensemble, you all have your own individual part, you don't have to share it. Okay. Well, terrific.
COVID changes that too.
What's that?
I think COVID kind of changes that too. 'Cause you
Oh,
have
yeah,
separate
I suppose. How about, good point, how about pre-COVID? Did you ever have to?
Oh, no,
Sure.
typically in low rise, you don't wanna share instruments just because of the size of the instrument.
Okay, that's a very good point. Yeah. What about if you play the piccolo or something really small?
Wayne and I shared parts a few times on trumpet.
You did? Good. Clarinets, have you ever shared a part?
Usually there's enough, we have so little clarinets and then, so many parts. Cause
Okay.
usually, each song has 3 different clarinet parts,
Okay.
so there's usually like 2 copies per part, so that's
Yeah.
enough.
And you know, nowadays, it's not hard to get extra parts, right? You just make photocopy, it takes like a few seconds. Just think about before photocopiers though, when they had to handwrite everything, that would be a big deal. And let me ask, what about saxophones? Did you ever?
There's only 2 altos, so it's
Yeah.
usually divided out to 1 over 2.
And you have your own individual part?
Yep.
Okay. All right, good. All right. Now, let's get back to this. The information found on the first page of the score needs to also be included and found on the first page of the part. So, again, I have the first page of the score up here on the screen. I'll switch back and forth between that and the part. But you see how the first page of the score here, we have the title, prelude, we have the tempo, we have the composer, we have the transcriber. Those are some important things, right? Now, if you look at the first page of the part, which I just gave you today, notice that a lot of that information, in fact, all of that information is included again, right? So we have the title, centered. We have the tempo, still in the same, kind of the same spot. We have the composer over here on the right justified. We have the transcriber. But there's one other thing in the top left of the part that doesn't appear on the score. What's that?
Like the actual part.
Yeah, the actual part itself. You see up in the left corner, bless you. You see in the upper left-hand corner, this would not be found on the score, obviously. But when we prepare a set of parts, or any kind of extracted part, we need to include the name of the instrument, we need to include its part number, and we need to include its transposition, if it transposes. So I kind of look at that on the upper left, and I look at it as like 3 pieces of information. The name of the instrument, clarinet. The name of the part, first clarinet, clarinet 1. The transposition, it's a clarinet in B flat, not a clarinet in A, or not a clarinet in Swahili, funky, whatever, you know. It's a clarinet in B flat. So I think that you gotta have those 3 pieces, you should have those 3 pieces of information within the specific part name, and that goes in the upper left-hand corner on the first page of the part. Now, do you have to actually write the part name and number and transition? Do you have to write it exactly like that in that order? And the answer is no. For instance, I would accept any of these different orders. You see the first B-flat clarinet, that's 1. You could list it on the page as this. First clarinet in B-flat. Right? That's still got all the information. And, you know, you look at your own parts that you have that you play, and I bet you, depending on the editor, depending on their format, depending on their house style, you might get it in a variety of orders, but at least I think they should give you all the information that's pertinent. Another way you could list it would be this. Whoops, don't do that. B-flat, clarinet, 1. That would be another way to get all that information out there. Another way to do it would be clarinet 1 in B-flat. So just choose, take your pick. You could do it that way, you could do one of these ways. But I would suggest once you pick an order, try to use that same order to be consistent among all the parts. But it's not like, you know, there's going to be instrumentalists like in wind ensemble, and they're gonna look at your paper at the end of the semester, and they're gonna say, hey, let's compare the order of their part names. Did they do the same? They're not gonna worry about that. Okay? Now, if one unique part is copied onto a page, such as in this example, in fact, this is for first B flat clarinet, as we said. If one part is copied onto a page by itself, the result is what we call an individual part. And that's the way majority, it seems like, of parts are. They're actually individual parts, which means you have the music for just one instrument. Individual part. Let's see if I can show you another example of an individual part. Let me wake my computer up here. I think in order to show it up here, I think I need to connect to the wireless display. Yeah. So that's the beginning of an individual part. What instrument is that part for, obviously? Tuba. That's right. You can see there. Does tuba transpose? No, so you don't need a key. Is it like we're going to have first, second, and third tubas? No, so you probably don't need the part number for this case. The tuba is just sufficient. Does anyone know where this part comes from? Some of you that have been here for several years, you may.
Is it the supplication mass? Or is it?
It's close. It's the toto Africa.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. It's the tuba part for the Kyrie that some of you that were here, was that 2 years ago now, maybe? I can't remember what it was. 1.5.
No, that would have been
Last fall.
Last fall.
Might have been October of, could it have been October 2019?
Yeah.
I forget. Anyways, this is from that piece. Okay. And this is an individual part. A couple other things which I guess I could talk about now. I wanted to get to later. Do you see how for an individual part, there's no left bar line or system bar line? You just leave the staff open on the left. That's the way it's supposed to be for a part. Do you see how, well, maybe you can't see very much, but do you see how besides the first system, do you see how I have a beginning measure number for the first measure of each succeeding system? Like measure 8 and measure 20 and so on and so forth. Do you see how there's the title, the composer, and you see the tempo and all that stuff on the first page of the part still? Let me go to another example. Let's see if I can find it. Oops, I opened the wrong one, shoot. I just wanted to open the, well, maybe this will open. Yeah, that's good enough. This is actually not an individual part. This is something that's called a shared part. Why would you say this is a shared part? Again, don't overthink it.
because it's 2 parts on one.
Yeah, because when you have 2 instruments on one separate part, so to speak, 2 instruments sharing the same track. So that's called a shared part. If a part includes 2 different instrumental lines, such as first and second flutes, or in this case, first and second horns, if they appear together on the same page, the result is what we call a shared part. A shared part. Now, can anyone think of an advantage why a shared part can sometimes be advantageous to a player or performer? I'm kind of asking you to read my mind a little bit, but I don't think I'm grasping too far. Yeah, so that you can see what another person's playing. That's a big help sometimes, right? So a shared part can sometimes be advantageous because it allows two performers to see each other's part, which may be helpful, especially in difficult music. Now maybe this isn't too difficult when you just got a bunch of whole notes. But maybe when the rhythms get a little more intricate, or the lines, heaven forbid, they may cross a little bit, that might be hard. But, not, as long as it's not too difficult, sometimes it's advantageous to have a shared part because, again, it allows two performers to see each other's part. Okay. With regard to either type of part, whether it's an wait a minute. I'm sorry, you guys, you didn't tell me I spelled this wrong. Individual. I can't write and speak at the same time. But whether or not you have an individual part, or a shared part, each part must include, and this is kind of important, and you probably know this already, but it bears mentioning here, each part must include every direction that is necessary in telling the player exactly how the part should sound. So besides the title and the part number and the tempo at the beginning and the composer and stuff, what are some other things that you need to be careful to include in the details of a part? Think about some other musical parameters or elements that you get in a score. Yeah.
Like if there, I can't think of what it's called, specific things for instruments, like any muting,
Okay.
or like slap tonguing, or any like specific.
Yeah, any directives, right? If you see something that says con sordino all of a sudden, you know to plug your instrument with the stopper, with the mute. Okay? What about, I mean, and I don't, this isn't, rocket science or anything, what about especially like dynamics? Don't you need to include the dynamics for that instrument part that you see in the score? You need to include that here. Okay? So that the player can know exactly how the part should sound. In fact, I think tempo indications and dynamics are some of the biggies. Some of the biggies. Other things that may not apply, like in this particular example, but other things that may occur, besides tempo and dynamics, you want to include any expressions. You want to include any slurring or phrasing information, that kind of thing. It's got to be transferred. It's got to be transferred to the part. It's, and that's one of the reasons why I like, especially for the final project, I like using some kind of notation software, because the notation software programs, once you have your score set, it can just like extract or pull that part out with all that information already there. You may have to just reposition it or adjust it a little bit to make it look nice or readable, but for the most part, everything's there. And then you don't have to, as a person, if you're handwriting parts, you don't have to remember and say, oh, I forgot the dynamic in measure 476. Yeah. Or whatever. Okay. So I talked about no left bar line in the parts. Every staff except the first should have a measure number. We talked about that. Oh yes. One temptation that must be resisted during part preparation is the use of shortcuts. Sorry. Again, the computer helps immensely, saves a whole lot of time. That's why I really recommend that. But you're really not supposed to, just don't leave your part extraction, like for your final project. Let's say you have the wind ensemble is going to perform your particular arrangement on like a Wednesday, and you're there on Wednesday morning, or even Wednesday around noontime, and you're frantically trying to get your part extracted. You're trying to create shortcuts because you need that. What time does wind ensemble meet on Wednesday? 3:30? Yeah. So be careful. You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to get yourself in that situation. Okay? As a rule, the parts must match the score note for note and item for item. It makes, I don't want to say it's common sense, but it makes sense. It's logical. Of course that's what you want. Of course that's what you want. Now, having said that, there's one big thing I want to mention here, and that is, what do multi-measure rests look like in parts compared to in the score? Well, you can see some examples of some right there. Yeah, so whereas most everything, pretty much everything else should be note for note and item for item matching the score. Rests lasting more than a measure are placed into a performer's part differently than they are visualized or seen in the score. And again, if you play instruments especially, if you played in band, you know this. You've seen this a lot of times. You know what it means. Okay? In parts, rests that are more than a measure are indicated with a thick horizontal line and the number of measures of rest above it. So you can see, for instance, in the second system there, both of the horns 1 and 2, they have 6 measures of rest. And that's what that symbol indicates. And it varies from editor to editor. I mean, you can make it look like this. It's certainly wider than, I don't want you to make it look like a whole rest. It's a little bit wider than that. And then the number of complete measures of rest is written above the thick horizontal line. And that tells the horn players in this case, you need to count for 6 measures of rest before you come in again. Let's see here. Let me see if I can go back to the stop. If it doesn't like this switch, then I have to shut it. Okay, look at that. Shut it down and turn it on again. Let me see if I can show you another example of the way the multi-measure rests look like in parts. Unfortunately, I think these two examples, 123 and 124, are out of order. But example 124, that's what the rest would look like for some instrument in the score. You see all those whole rests. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever they are. But now, how should the performer's extracted or individual part look? Well, if that's the way the score looks, with 1 2 rests before rehearsal B, and then 6 whole rests after rehearsal B, it should look like that top one in the performer's part. Okay. And be careful. One thing you want to watch out for, I guess I'll come here. One thing you want to watch out for, what if there is, let's say you have somebody's part, and what if there's like this huge, really important tempo change, like right in the middle of this 6-bar rest? Can I do this and can I indicate the tempo change just over this and kind of say, you know, you're a smart player, you're a smart coach, you can figure out which measure that tempo change? No. Yeah, go ahead. What do you think we should do? Kind of like what that example shows.
Do you break up the rest?
Yeah, you're going to have to break the multi-measure rest up. If there's something important in there, even if something as small as a retardando, or especially if there's a rehearsal letter or a big tempo change, you need to break it up. So for instance, you may have 3 measures of rest like this. Oops, get rid of that. And then you may have a measure of rest for the tempo change right here, whatever the tempo change may be. And then you may have to do like, well, no, actually scratch that. You can probably do it, this would probably be a simpler way to do it. Just put the 3 other measures of rest, because you know that the tempo change then occurs on the first bar of this multi-measure rest. Yeah. Let me pause here for a second. Does anyone have any questions? Again, I know I'm throwing a lot of facts and details and information at you, although a lot of this you may already know. I just want to point it out to you that this is what we'll be focusing on, you know, for the next assignment and so forth. But just let me know if you have any questions as we go along. There's just a little bit more that I want to talk about, and then we might, if we can conclude early, we will again. When you make individual parts or extract parts from a piece, depending on how long your parts are, how many pages your parts are, you have to be concerned about what's called the page turn. The page turn. How many of you, whether in band or whatever, have you had like a set of parts that's like a bunch of pages long and you have to turn pages? Yeah, right? Like especially when you, I'm thinking about like when you perform on student recital. How many times do I see there's 1 stand or 2 stands right next to each other, It's all laid out there, but yet you still sometimes have to turn pages, right? So do you think the very last system, or the very last few measures on a page, should be filled with a bunch of like 30-second notes, and then you have no place to take a breath or no time to put your instrument down, you have to flip the page over, and then you got more 30-second notes again. Does that sound realistic? No, doesn't sound realistic. So, whenever the instrument part is longer than one page, one or more page turns may be required, and it really demands your attention as the arranger. Okay? The best location for a page turn is in the middle of an extended rest. That is, if you can, several beats or several measures of rest before the page turn, and several beats or several measures of rest after the page turn. Okay. Now let me tell you from experience, that is not always possible. Not always possible. See if I can switch one more time back to the computer. Because I did want to show you the bottom of one of these pages. I had a feeling this was going to... Oh, there we go. Just have to wait. Alright, let's get this. I don't know why this isn't letting me move it. Ah, there we go. Oops. Let's shrink the size of this. Okay, you can't, well, I'll shrink the size a little more, even though it's going to be very tiny, but I want you to be able to see both the bottom of the first page of this and the top of the next page. Let's try 60%. Let's see if that does enough. Okay. Now I know it's really tiny, but page 1, page 2. Now I understand that both of these pages could be photocopied, and you could lay both of them flat, and they could both fit on a stand, and you wouldn't need to have a page turn, probably. But let's just pretend that this first page of the part, let's just pretend that that was at the very end of something, and you were forced to make a page turn. Notice that there are just a few brief rests in the end of the last measure of the first page. But what do you have cushioning on the top of the next page? You have how many measures? Yeah, you have 10 measures of rest. So would it be possible for, again, pretend you had to turn the page, would it be possible for one of the two horn players to remove their instrument from playing position, maybe set it down or something, and then turn the page when you have 10 measures of rest? Does that have enough? Yeah. See, these are things that I need to think about as an arranger, and these are things that I think you should think about as an arranger too. Okay. One thing that your book doesn't mention that the other recommended text does mention is that when you're forced to turn a page, should you just maybe give maybe a few beats of rest so that the performer can take the instrument out of playing position, put it down, and then just throw the page across, and then everything on the stand falls and makes a big crash. Right? We want enough time for the player to be able to turn the page quietly. Right? That makes sense. So I don't know, I think 10 measures would be plenty good. Now, oftentimes you don't have that luxury, but and again, that's another reason why using a music notation program is very helpful. Because if you had hand wrote all of this out, you come down to the end and there's no other rest up there, you'd have to start with a brand new piece of paper and start writing that first page of the part all over again. But music notation program, you can move measures, you can push them to other systems, you can push systems to other pages, that kind of thing. It's not set in stone, and it makes it a lot more flexible. Okay? And sometimes when you don't have a cushion rest like that, sometimes you need to take a whole system and you need to put it on the next page. Or you need to take a system from that page and put it over here. It's kind of just a balancing act, trial and error, so that until you find that you get what you feel is the best spot for a page turn. if you have a page turn. Okay. By the way, I think your text actually does talk about this in your reading for next time. How many, yeah, you can pretty much see enough of the whole page. How many total systems are on the first page of this horn chart? 8. And how many are on the next page? 9. Okay. The author in your text talks about this. When you do it on music notation software, I would say 7, 8, 9. Those would be a good number of systems to include on a page of an individual part. What if I tried to include 16 systems on the first page? How would that look? Well, yeah, or else they would be just crammed in, so packed together, overlaid that you wouldn't be able to read anything, right? So we're also not only thinking about page turns, but we're also thinking about readability of visual this way. If I just put three lines or 3 systems of music on the first page, that's just a little too few. I mean, make use of the space that you have, but at the same time, don't cramp it so much that it's unreadable. Why do you think, I'm just curious if you know, again, trying to read my mind, why do you think this page over here can fit 9 systems pretty nicely, but this one only 8? That's right, yeah, because it doesn't have all that title information on the first page. So, yeah, just use common sense when it comes to that. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is sometimes when there's no way to get around a good page turn and you're actually forcing, a performer has to turn the page quickly, there's just no other way around it. Sometimes what you can do, the book says, well, not your book, but I did want to point out that, let's see, where is it in this one? I don't see the actual example, but what you can do at the end of a page, you can write this, VS. And that stands for a Latin term called volti subito. And that translated means turn the page quickly. It's giving you a warning that says, hey, there's nothing the arranger, there's nothing I could do to give you time to turn it quietly or slowly or whatever in a relaxed fashion. You're going to have to turn the page quickly because you have notes right away on the next page. And that's what VS, volti subito, it means turn the page quickly. Sometimes arrangers will use that. Now maybe that's a little more information than you wanted to know, but I don't know if you've ever seen that before in any of the parts, but that's what it stands for, and that's what it means. Okay. Now, any questions before I distribute the next assignment? Probably more information that you wanted to know about notation or about creating parts or anything like that, but I think it's good information. This next assignment is going to ask you on the front side, and this is going to be handwritten. I want you to make sure that you rhythmically align the measures vertically as accurately as you can. Again, you don't need to use a ruler to measure things, but just eyeball it as good as you can. And then I'm going to ask you, on the back side is a score, and I'm going to ask you to take your own piece of staff paper, and I'm going to ask you to create a part, an individual part for, like, I think it's the second clarinet or something, for the first 16 measures of the score. And that's going to include the title and everything you need that you have on that handout I gave you to make a part look like what it means. You know, all the tempo markings, the dynamics, you name it. Okay? When you get this, you can go ahead and make like a banana and split. Or make like a tree and leave, or any of those other things. Because we are out of time. And I guess I won't see you until Monday, because today's Wednesday. All right, thank you all. Have a good rest. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.